Hello everyone, I'm Forrest McFreelava, and this is Mayan Speedplay number 9. We left off with massive Cusco bordered by us, although we're not going to attack them just yet. We also are probably about to be at peace with the Cherokee. We got Tech 9 for admin, which allows us to get military ideas, although we now have a dangerous sort of game to play, whether or not we focus on military ideas or military techs to catch up. We're also invading the Cherokee, whose army is just kind of running away from ours in a rather worrying way. They nearly got one of our 1 stacks, which would have been kind of upsetting. Luckily, we managed to catch them just before they managed to circle around us entirely, defeat them, and now we're sieging out their capital, as well as all their other country bits, which are already ours, basically. So with that all said and done, we're just kind of waiting there because our leader has siege, and we're just going to kind of run down the clock with them, although our army is not quite so fortunate, as we need to pull troops really to any hotspot that may appear to be about to arise. Our colonies are all finishing roughly at the same time, which is nice, so we're going to get a nice little border with the Huron set up. We also have 12,000 men down in the south. We're probably going to invade Cusco fairly soon, as if we're not getting all this Inca golden land, someone else will. And that just sounds completely terrible and practically anathema to our objectives. Now, let's see, combat famine, we do go ahead and do that. They do have an ally who will join with them. We raise up a bit of additional mercenary forces. Mercenaries just because we can afford it, and manpower is eternally going to be our enemy in this session, in this campaign, just in general. We do lose 1 stability, although that's not too bad. We were sitting at +3 this entire time. And we're at an interesting yet unfortunate point in our nation's history where there are fires that need to be put out in the north and in the south at basically any point. We do go ahead and attack up north. We can just go ahead and annex the Cherokee, and we chase down this hostile army. Our goal with all of these native powers is, as before, to just take over as much as we possibly can, as quickly as we possibly can. That battle might have gone unfortunately for us. Luckily, it didn't quite, which is always the best thing. And there we go. We wanted again finally stack wipe them. We were taking quite a bit of losses. We do go ahead and declare war and just march our armies right down, win a decisive battle, yet do not stack wipe them quite worryingly. And in just a moment, we'll hopefully finish up our sieges up north. The general idea is to just expand as much as we can, deny as much land as possible to the Europeans, because we aren't really at a great spot militarily. We do go ahead and get a military idea group. We're going to probably focus on some military ideas before military techs. That way techs will ultimately be slightly cheaper, and our military will have some just running boosts. So we get quality, and we're just going to keep moving forward with quality. We will never have quantity. Our manpower reserves are just so low. We do rush back over. They actually attacked us. They have something like 30,000 troops, so it's very good that they're coming in piecemeal. We can't actually afford the next upgrade, and it's just bonuses for artillery, of which we have essentially none. So we're not in any rush to get that tech anyway. We do go ahead and annex that state. Now there are just a small group of native areas up in the northeast. Back down against the Incan civilizations, we're starting to pull our forces. The fact that they had 30,000 men really worries me. Even if they're poor quality men, we only have 12,000 men in theater at the moment, and that is just too disproportionate for my blood. We do roll all these forces together, launch them right on over, build an additional artillery piece, seeing as that's really one of the bonuses we have over them. And we're going to keep that army clumped together, despite the fact that we could move it into 2 groups. We go ahead and grant New World Charter once again. That's essentially the only thing we do. We are under attack by their armies. Luckily, we win out loud, although we are, as you can see, taking quite a bit of attrition with our forces. Attrition in the general sense, not in the game mechanic sense. We do rush down these 12,000 men, essentially more than doubling the amount of forces we have in the area. We let them escape, and we're going to try to rush into these mountain passes and attempt to knock their ally out of the war. We do have to rush back and kill that one stack though, which we do successfully. We now also have this artillery piece, which we just bring into that army, and hopefully that will all work itself together in such a way that we don't have any disasters going on. Now we can't get into their interior very easily. We do stack wipe one of their armies though, which is quite nice. So we're probably going to, 1, win that battle, and 2, roll up through the northern wastelands and try to just roll around and attack them from the northeast. Their fort right there is going to prevent most of our movements, but if we can just loop around it, we can siege out their fortless countryside and hopefully just encourage them to make peace in that way. Now, it might be a little bit hopeful, though I think it can be done. Sadly, I realize that wasteland just shows up right to the right, and we can't actually go around that way. We leave a force to siege their capital, although I realize that's probably a terrible idea. Luckily, our siege of that fort in the south manages to be concluded fairly successfully. We put a general in charge of it, and that discourages them from attacking us, which nearly did just happen. So with that said and done, we go ahead and just use that army to siege out their countryside, the general goal of that being to just force them out of the war as swiftly as possible, and I think that that'll be done, and done easily enough. Now, despite that little fort icon that isn't actually a fort, we can just take that back in a moment. We rush our forces around, we can make peace with them, which we do. Luckily, we're not even exiled because they're natives and they just don't understand that sort of thing. Or maybe it's because their allies had military access. I'm really not sure why we didn't get exiled, but I'm not going to complain because it works very well into really just our objectives. That battle is not going very well at all. Luckily, we have a lot of reinforcements nearby, which we just send on in. We see what we can get in a peace deal, and it looks like we could just get everything we could ever desire. So we go ahead and do that. It'll be 96% overextension, 238 gold. We can make them break their alliance and pay us war reps. We do all of that. And then I realized we hadn't finished coring some of the territories we took up in the north, because we're essentially expanding in 2 ways, 2 directions at the same time, which is necessarily quite an unfortunate thing. We're now going to have to deal with about a year of being overextended, as there's really no better way out of it. We could probably release the country we had just taken in the north as some sort of vassal, and sadly Cusco undoes what we had wanted them to do. We had taken all their coastal areas so they wouldn't just get invaded, and they managed to just colonize a new one. Alright, so now we're dealing with event revolts now, which I'm not entirely certain is because of our high overextension, but it may very well be. I also realize that we're in desperate need of a naval task force over in the Pacific, so we do go ahead and just build that up. However, it's not going to help us now, and right now we're going to just have to run this army as quickly as we can back up north, where we suddenly are finding ourselves without really any ability to project force whatsoever, which, as you can imagine, is far less than ideal, and this was a very worrying moment as I ran that army up. Now, as soon as that revolt fired, we get another one. We're just going to not click that for as long as we can. The only forces we do have in the north are just sustaining our colonial endeavors, and we're going to just kind of charge up there with that group. These forces are all just kind of going to have to do their thing. Our estates are getting uppity once more, which is always what they're doing. They're always a little bit uppity. We go ahead and just let them stop loving us, although that does eventually hurt us with our manpower recovery rate. Luckily, our colonies are still finishing, so even if things are going poorly in other respects, they're still going well in, at least a few. We do charge right on in, which may have been a little suicidal since they are at our same tech group as all rebels are these days and have been for the last, year and a half of patches. Another rebellion broke out. They're probably rushing straight to our forts, which is not a very comforting sign at all. We are just rushing all of these troops down as quickly as we can. We have a lot of spare colonists, so we're going to go straight into the Lesser Antilles, which have 4 or 5 base tax and production each. Anyway, with that all said and done, we drop an army over to just rush on in. It looks like I was right about them just beelining to our forts, so it's a good thing that I started funding those forts again, This army goes and charges up north. They'll eventually deal with the Huron. Probably not really so much eventually, so much as we're doing it right now. We also drop off a couple forces to just go ahead and siege those territories out, charging into the Huron, and it looks as though they're not going to be really that much of a threat, which is always a nice thing to discover. Unfortunately, we lose one of our colonies. We hadn't quite gotten troops over to it yet, just because, there's fires everywhere. Luckily, we do manage to defeat their armies. One of them just ran off into the distance and will probably come back and hassle us. The others are hopefully more or less dead. No, they're all just running off to the east. At any rate, though, we're pretty soon going to have control over their countryside. We do go ahead and mothball all of our forts again and start dropping off people on all these new colonies. That way they'll hopefully actually maintain themselves and not just all die. Now, with that all said and done, we do send troops over. Hopefully we actually just don't do that since they have 12,000 men there. And we recruit a conquistador, which we throw in charge of the army and run back. Meanwhile, more colonies are finishing, so that's more colonies in the Antilles, which is going to be a huge boon to our income and just completely welcome in all ways. I noticed there are foreign rebels, so we go ahead and just support that fort because I don't want it to just fall if they cross over, which they probably would if they saw that it wasn't being supplied. We do go ahead and keep hiring advisors despite the fact that we are in a deficit, because the deficit's not that bad and we are getting money from all of these New World nations. The rebels do cross over onto the fort, so that was a really good call. I've learned that it's always prudent to just sort of support forts if it looks like anything could possibly happen ever. Simply because if it can, it almost certainly will. We start rushing our troops over to the boats now. We're going to go ahead and just land them right on there and pick up our navy from the Pacific, run them on over, and from there just bring all of our troops over in a quick, or at least somewhat quick manner. I'm really happy we have transport fleets on either side now. That is honestly the best thing that we could possibly have done, and it's really my favorite thing in this game is to have transport fleets everywhere. They are just so unbelievably useful, especially because I never really have that large of armies, as you may have noticed through all of my campaigns if you've watched them. Except Victoria 2, where I'm the opposite. At any rate, though, we managed to peace out. Unfortunately, their noble rebels just kind of chilled there anyway. We go ahead and just rush this army north because I feel like it'll be slightly quicker than rushing the navy up and down. And we go ahead and just load them up. We'll send them right on back. And then rush up to the north and deal with the rebellion. At some point, we're probably going to want to colonize a direct line between the main area and the Great Plains. Or not Great Plains, I'm sorry, Great Lakes. And eventually declare war again on the Cusco. But that is going to be a while. So we have a lot of objectives that we need to get done. And you'll notice for the while, we're just going to be rushing through wasteland. Or not really wasteland, just uncolonized areas. However, we do charge in against those natives. Or, well, I guess nobles, but they are native nobles. And hopefully we'll just sort of win that pretty quickly. We'll just rush right back out onto the sea. And at this point, we are coring a lot of areas. We go ahead and make a state, which costs us most of our admin. We are really just going hard with our admin usage, not getting any techs or anything. And that's probably going to stay just the way it is for some time now while we're in this era of just nothing but offensive wars. As we've really expanded the size of our nation just to a really large degree in the last few episodes, and there's probably going to be at least 1 to 2 more where we're just constantly attacking various places. Simply because if we don't do it, the Europeans will, and I would rather fight people with absolutely no technology than people with tons of tech and global empires with huge alliance blocks behind them. I think that's more prudent. It might be difficult for us in the short term. At any rate, thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll be back tomorrow for real.